Awesome. So welcome everyone to the 2021 version of Female Hockey Day Weekend, fueled by Gatorade and presented by our friends at ATB Financial. My name is Danielle Krejci, and I've been with Hockey Alberta now for 12 years. I'm a manager there, and I was a hockey player as well. So back in the day, I grew up playing for Edmonton with Edmonton Girls Hockey Association, and fortunate enough to spend 2 years with the University of Alberta Pandas under Coach Hallie Draper, and even earning a national championship in my rookie season, which was a pretty cool and unique experience. We definitely didn't have resources and special events like this one back when I was your age, so it's really exciting to see how far the game has come and really look forward to watching it grow. I now have two young daughters of my own who are just starting to get on skates, but I'm really excited to watch them put on hockey gear, just like all of you one day. So who's ready to get Female Hockey Day started? I know I am. As I mentioned, hopefully you received your Gatorade participant package in the mail. If you haven't yet, please do follow up with us at the end of the event, and we'll make sure that you get that in your hands. For those of you that registered late, no worries, it'll be on its way on Monday. But like I said, we do want to make sure we acknowledge our sponsors. Gatorade was a huge one, so today's event is fueled by Gatorade, and ATB Financial as well, as a long-standing supporter of minor hockey in the province and Hockey Alberta as well. So we're excited to bring you this event, and while we wish we could be celebrating in person, we know we'll make the best of it. And let's look at the positive. What makes this year so exciting is that we're able to have athletes, parents, coaches, brothers, sisters joining us over this two-day event from all over the province. We have nearly 300 people on today from Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, Lethbridge, and everywhere in between, which is really exciting. As we spend the next 2 days, or 2 mornings, I should say, together, we want to hear about how you're celebrating. So please feel free to share on social media, use the hashtags #WhyWePlay, fueled by Gatorade, or Alberta Built, and connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So we'll look forward to seeing those. Better yet, include some of those pictures with your Gatorade squeeze bottles and towels. We've got some exciting presentation and panelists coming up over the next 2 days, and we do encourage you to attend them all. Definitely stay engaged. There's a Q&A function that you'll be able to access throughout the event, and we can, your presenters are really excited to answer some of your questions along the way. On that note, at the end of it all, we will be playing a trivia game with some really great prizes for those who participate. So definitely stay engaged, because we'll be asking questions about the presentations over these 2 days. A couple of housekeeping items before we roll into the first session, but parents, you are definitely welcome and encouraged to sit on the sessions this morning. And we also have parent sessions for you this afternoon. And that's all included as part of the registration package. So if you're with us right now, it means you received the participant email. All of the links for each of the sessions are there. We set it up so that you do have to click a separate link for each of the presentations, but they were all included in that email. So, and we will direct you at the end of each session on which presentation is next and which link to click. As I mentioned, this is a webinar platform, so we can't see you, but I know that you can see us, and we do want you to engage with us by using the Q&A function. So today, our schedule, we've got Sara Oikawa from Gatorade Sports Science Institute will start us off with nutrition for the female athlete. After that, we'll be joined by some of our great Team Alberta alumni to share their experiences, insights, and maybe a funny story or two. After that, we'll take a quick 15-minute break, get a snack, stretch, run around the block. You're welcome to do so at that time. Following the break, we're going to hear from a couple amazing ladies who work in the hockey world. So, you know, at the end of this all, when you're sort of coming to the end of the playing days, know that that's not the end, and you do have the opportunity to come work on the other side of the game. So finally, we'll wrap up day one with an active session from Cujo Conditioning's Tina Johnson. So make sure before that session, you grab your running shoes, your Gatorade squeeze bottle, towel, clothes to move in, and to have it on good authority that you might need a backpack with some books too. So I'm not sure what that's about, but you'll have to tune in to see. The parents, as you mentioned earlier, as the player sessions wrap up, we encourage you to stick around. We do have an afternoon of information specifically for you. So without further ado, let's start the weekend. It's my honor to present our Fueled by Gatorade presenter, Sara Oikawa. Sara is a research and development senior scientist at Gatorade Sports Science Institute. I just realized I wasn't flipping through my slides, so I'm gonna get down to Sara here. So I apologize for that. So Sara is a research and development senior scientist at Gatorade Sports Science Center Institute lab at the IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. She earned her honors of science kinesiology, Masters of Science in Kinesiology, and her PhD in kinesiology at McMaster University in Hamilton, Canada. And her work has focused on muscle hypertrophy in training young adults, and her PhD work focused in dietary protein quality and muscle protein synthesis in inactivity and resistance training models. That is a mouthful. So her list of accomplishments in research could go on, but I'll leave some of that for her to share as well. So Sara, thank you for being here today, and I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dee. And thank you everyone for having me today. I'm just going to start my slideshow here. And whoops, what happened there? Oh, sure. Still learning how to use a computer. Dee, do I need to switch the display here?
Or? Yeah, go full screen, I think.
There we go. Does that look better?
Give me 1 second.
Yep, you're good, Sara.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Kendall. Okay, cool. All right, everyone. So again, thank you so much for having me, and a huge thank you to Alberta Hockey for having us here and allowing us to present. So as Dee so nicely mentioned, my name is Sara Oikawa. I'm a senior scientist at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute in Bradenton, Florida. And so you'll notice the word Gatorade in our Sports Science Institute. So what a lot of people don't know is that there is a ton of science and a ton of work and research that goes in behind creating all of our Gatorade products because Gatorade is a backed by science company. So what we do is we are the ones behind the scenes making sure that the things that we make are actually what they say they are. And so that gives me a lot of great pride in my work and something that I really appreciate about this type of work that I do. Now, as Dee mentioned, my background is mostly in protein. So if anyone has protein related questions as we go through the presentation, I'm very happy to answer those once we get through. But today we're just going to go over a general understanding of nutrition, particularly for female athletes, because we know that there are differences between all of our athletes. And so as I realize that the age ranges within this group are quite wide, I'll definitely not be able to cover everything. So please, please, please make sure you use the chat function, the Q&A function if you do have any questions, and hopefully we can get to them at the end. So moving on. As you all know, female athletes are really making their mark on the world of sport, and that's pretty evident. A lot more broadcasting of female sports leagues, which is fantastic, and a lot more exposure for us as well. And importantly, there was almost 4 million people who turned in to watch the Canada-US women's gold medal hockey game in 2018. So that just goes to show you that, a lot of people are having their eye on female athletes, and this is really an area that in the past, we haven't always done a good job as scientists is looking at females alone or making comparisons to females and males. So this is somewhere in the last decade or so, and the way that we see the future of science is really, making those, distinguishing the differences between men and women. So I want to start off our presentation today by just quickly asking some of you if you can think of any physical differences that you notice between boys and girls or men and women. So these are anything that you would notice, maybe not temperament wise, but what are some physical differences you might see? And if you can type those in the chat below. Boys have mustaches. So I see strength. That's interesting. Yeah. Boys have mustaches. Anyone else? They get much taller, knees and hips. Wonderful. Speed. Boys are more aggressive. Girls are smarter. Awesome. So yeah, so I think, you guys are doing, boys think they're faster. That's true. I think, you guys have pointed out some really great differences. And I think the fact that we're all kind of chiming in on this conversation does point to the fact that we know that there are differences between men and women and between boys and girls. And, I think what's really important to bring home with that is that, because we are physically different, it means that our nutritional needs are going to be different. And that kind of brings us to our next point, is just that, not all athletes are the same. And then also to that point, it doesn't mean that all females are the same. So it doesn't mean that we all need the same nutrition. And so something I really want you to think about when you're moving forward, if you hopefully take any of this information with you going forward, is that everyone is going to be different. You're not going to be the same as your female sibling and your female friend. Everyone's nutrition needs are going to vary. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. All right, so what are we going to talk about? There are a lot of things that make female athletes unique, and we're going to cover a few of those areas today. So the first and perhaps the most obvious is that we as females have a different hormone and we have a hormone and a menstrual cycle, which boys do not, but our hormone profile is also different than boys. And that might play a little bit into how we dictate our nutrition. We also have some differences in bone health, differences in metabolism, which we'll touch on a little bit. We'll talk about protein, carbohydrate, and fat needs for female athletes. And then lastly, we'll talk about some important vitamin and mineral needs that you might want to consider when we are moving through and trying to create, specific dietary plans for ourselves. All right, so back to the chat. Can anyone think of any nutritional needs that you think you might need that would be different than maybe a male athlete? Anything you think you might need more of or less of than someone who's a male? More iron, that's a great answer. I see a lot about dairy in here. That's good too. Green veggies. Awesome. You guys are great. I really appreciate everyone typing into the chat here. So some of the things that that you brought up in the chat are we're going to address today, which is really great. So let's get into the bulk of our presentation here. So we're not going to go over this graph. I know it looks a little crazy and it is a little bit much, but mostly what I want to go over in this is, what is the first thing we distinguish male athletes from female athletes is that female athletes have a menstrual cycle. And so what that means is that we go through this 28-day phase where we have changing and fluctuating levels of all of our different hormones. And so that's what these lines are down here, are the different levels of our hormones and how they change over the day. And in some instances, all of our hormones play a very specific role in how our body functions. And so they might impact our cardiovascular system, so that's our heart, our respiratory system, and then parts of our metabolism and even our muscle and our bones. So just something to keep in mind. But kind of where the research sits on this is that because these fluctuations are happening very quickly, despite them happening every month, they don't make a tremendous impact on, our overall health. And a really good example of this is Paula Radacliff. And so she's a marathon runner. She's pictured in the photo here. And she held the women's marathon record from 2009 to 2013. And in 23 to 2009, I don't know why those numbers switched. Anyway, so in London, she broke the world record for female performance in a marathon at 2 hours, 15 minutes, and 25 seconds. And at the time that Paula ran in the London Marathon, she was in the menstruation phase of her menstrual cycle. So all I really want to get across here is that if you're menstruating, or it doesn't really matter what time of your menstrual phase that you're in, you can always perform your best. And so Paula's a fantastic example of that. So just wanted to bring that up quickly as we move on. So moving into bone health. So hopefully it's not lost on any of you how important bones are for really everything. So bones are our skeleton, and they are what make up all of the areas for our muscles to hold on to, so that we can generate force, so that we can shoot the puck, so that we can skate really, really fast. But what we need to consider, especially at the ages that a lot of you are at, is that this is the optimum time for us to be growing bones. So about 30% of our peak bone mass is achieved when we're in the ages of kind of 10 to 25. And so it's really important that we consider bone health and some nutritional considerations for bone health as you move through these ages. So diets and calcium and vitamin D will help with bone growth, because calcium is what makes up our bones. And so I'm sure you've seen that on lots of commercials and stuff like that. But someone mentioned, what are some specific dietary needs when we think about women? And it was that we might need more dairy products. And so that's a really good example of why we need more dairy, is because we need to support bone growth in this critical time. So the other thing that's really important, and something that will kind of be a common theme across this presentation, is that you need to make sure that you're eating enough food in general. It's not just about the nutrients that you're consuming, the individual nutrients, it's also about making sure you have enough energy. So you all are expending tons of energy playing hockey, and that's fantastic. But if we're not eating enough food, it means that we're burning off energy, and then we don't have anything left over to help build bones or build our tissues or repair our tissues. And so really what this comes down to is, if we're not eating enough, then we can't grow better, we can't grow faster, we can't go stronger. So eating in general is a really big deal here. So we're going to touch very briefly on metabolism, and metabolism just means how our body functions. And so what we generally think of when we think about metabolism is that we use carbohydrates as our primary source for fuel, and we use fats a little bit as well for our source for fuel. An interesting thing about females is that we actually use more fat for fuel than males. And why this happens, there's a lot of things within our muscle that are different than in males, but we tend to use more of our fat stores for fuel than males, which is a little interesting. But the interesting thing as well, and kind of tying this all back to Gatorade, is that when we consume a sports drink, which is generally high in carbohydrates, we can all use the same amount of those carbohydrates from our sport drink as males. So it doesn't matter that we're using more fat for fuel when it comes to what we ingest. It more has to do with, if we're exercising and we kind of run out of fuel, where are we going to get that fuel from? So moving more into nutrition for our female athletes. I mentioned already that it's really important that we're getting enough food overall. And so some of you may be familiar with, the concept of calories and eating calories, but typically for girls or women around your age, we're looking to consume somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 calories per day to support both exercise needs as well as just general growth needs, because we're all still growing at this time. And even if you're done growing, we're still, like I mentioned, we need to repair our tissues. So when you go out and play a game, we need to remodel that muscle and that bone, our tendons and our ligaments. We need more protein and more energy in order to make those processes work. And so calories are going to be important no matter where you are in growth. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to consume that number of calories, because I know, 1,800 or 2,000 or 1,500, like what does that actually mean? So here's just an example of what eating 1,800 calories might look like. So for breakfast, maybe you eat 400 calories, and this is just a guide. This isn't how you need to eat your food. It's just an example of where these calories might come from. So maybe you have a couple slices of toast with some peanut butter, you have a yogurt, and then you have an apple. For lunch, we might eat a sandwich and some soup, and then again, maybe a piece of fruit or some veggies. For dinner, we have a little more calories, so maybe we have something like has a bit more carbohydrates. We have some pasta, we have some salad on the side, and then of course we have space for dessert. So we indulge in some ice cream, and then snacks as well are going to make up our total caloric intake. So here I just have some fruit and then some cheese, and everyone's dietary preferences are going to be different, but this is just to show you kind of a breakdown of the types of foods that you could eat that can contribute to that total energy intake or that total calorie intake that's really going to help to fuel our bodies and then fuel us through sport. So when we talk about carbohydrates, we typically think of grain products, so cereal, breads, muffins, pastas, things like that. But something that I think is really important when we think about, carbohydrates being our primary source for fuel, it doesn't just have to be a grain product. It's anything that really contains sugars as well are carbohydrates. So fruits and vegetables are also carbohydrates. So here we just have pictures of any fruits and vegetable, but those are carbohydrates as well. And as I mentioned earlier, what's contained within Gatorade or sports drinks in general are carbohydrate sources. So they're sugars, and that's to help provide us a quick source of fuel when we're in game play. And so it's important just that we know, where our sources of carbohydrates are coming from when we decide to construct our diet, just so we're not only thinking carbohydrates come from grain products, because that's not the case. All right, so continuing on about our carbohydrates here, benefits for consuming carbohydrates are very well established in the literature. It's where kind of Gatorade made their big mark. And it doesn't just come down to being able to fuel your muscles, which I think is an important thing. It's also important for recovery and for performance outside of your muscles as we play hockey. And so if you don't consume enough carbs while you're playing sport, or while you're, just living your normal life, if you're not eating enough energy or eating enough carbohydrates, you likely won't have enough energy. And so it's not a great idea to go into a high performance game, so an important game, without enough fuel, because it means that you won't be able to perform your best. We also need carbohydrates, which are broken down into molecules called glucose, to fuel your brain. And so our brain always needs a steady supply of glucose, but if we're diverting that glucose and our carbohydrates to fuel our muscle, it means less is going to our brain, which is really, really crucial, especially if we think about, the end of a game. Maybe we've moved into overtime, and we need to be able to make quick decisions and good decisions even when we're tired. So having enough carbohydrate to also fuel your brain is important. They also keep our skills sharp. Going back to what I just said about making important decisions at maybe when you're starting to get tired and your fuel sources have gone down, that's maybe where we start to engage things like sports drinks, to be able to have, that quick burst of energy to help keep our skills sharp when they matter the most. And importantly, I think it's just good to note when we talk about female athletes is that there isn't a lot of difference in terms of how we store carbohydrates between males and females. So just knowing that males are just as good as us at storing carbohydrates for fuel. So really hammering this point home here, and something that we get a lot of questions about, especially from young athletes, is that, watching caloric intake or watching carbohydrate intake in regards to consuming things that are 0 calories. So things that are artificially sweetened, especially when we think about beverages. So Gatorade Zero, for example, doesn't have any carbohydrates in it. And then I think that's really important to understand here is if you don't have calories in a food, you're not going to have energy to expend. And so just being aware of the foods and the drinks that we're putting into our bodies so that we can appropriately understand how they're going to be used to help us perform in sport. So going towards protein for females and male athletes, there actually isn't a massive difference in how men and women use protein. And we'll get into the small difference that might occur in a moment. But importantly, protein provides all the building blocks for our body. Every single cell in our body needs protein to build it up. And so consuming enough protein is really, really important. Like I mentioned, especially after exercise, when we've just maybe damaged some of our muscles, or our muscles are trying to recover, we really need protein to help that repair process. And that's going to happen every time we exercise. And so it's always important, try and consider having something that's protein containing, like a meal or a snack after you exercise is always a good place to start to help kind of jumpstart that repair process. If high quality or really good sources of protein typically come from animal sources. So they would be meats and things like that, but also dairy sources. So milk, cheese, yogurt, cottage cheese, whey protein is derived from milk. So animal-based protein sources are kind of the best for jump-starting that repair of our tissues. But if you are not having animal source protein, that's okay as well. There's some very good high quality plant-based protein sources as well. So for example, soy protein and pea protein are also very good quality proteins, but just making sure once again that you consult with your doctor or your team dietitian to try and get a good understanding of where you can source plant-based protein sources, or even if you're not a plant-based eater, always consult with a dietitian before you make any big changes to your diet, but these are just some things to consider. So we're going to do a little bit of an exercise here, and something that, I think is probably might be new to you, and it was definitely new to me, is that when someone mentioned earlier, what is the main difference between, when we asked what the difference was between male and female athletes, and someone says they're taller or they have they're bigger bodies. And so that really hammers home here when we talk about protein recommendations and we express them per kilogram or per pound of body mass. Because if I weigh 100 pounds, but a male hockey player weighs 200 pounds, is the same amount of protein going to affect us the same way? Probably not. So we express it per kilogram or per pound of body mass. And so if you have a piece of paper with you and a calculator, I would love for you to do this exercise with me. We're just going to calculate how much protein we need. So we say 1.6 grams per kilogram per day is how much protein we need in a day for an athlete. It's above what's actually recommended for the average population, but that's because athletes have that increased turnover and that increased need for repair that we talked about already. And so we can break this down into 0.4 grams per kilogram of protein for each meal. So every time you have a meal, this is kind of the amount of protein we're hoping that you have. So if you know your body mass in kilograms, you can multiply your body mass by 0.4. If you know your body mass in pounds, then you can multiply it by 0.18. So if you could just take a minute here, or if you want to jot down these numbers and you can calculate it on your own time later, feel free to calculate both what your total needs of protein are going to be per day, as well as how much protein you should be aiming for every time you have a meal. All right, so if you want to do that now, that's great. If not, you can take note and do it later. But I just want to show us a quick example of why this is important. So again, here we have a 40 kilogram player and a 55 kilogram player. And if we multiply out their body mass by our protein per meal amount, we see that there's quite a big difference in the amount of protein that each of them needs. And so that's why it's important that we express protein per kilogram of body mass, because it's going to be very different depending on how big you are. And so just some examples of how much protein these people might be having. So the 40 kilogram player might have, a couple of eggs and some yogurt as a snack or a meal, or some whole grain toast with peanut butter. Whereas our 55 kilogram player might go for, a glass of milk and some cheese, or some chicken drumsticks here as well. So just to give you an idea of where those sources of protein might be coming from. So someone also mentioned that female athletes might require some more iron compared to male athletes, and that's a fantastic point. And so females need 18 milligrams of iron per day, and that's 10 milligrams more than males. So males only need 8 milligrams of iron per day according to our nutritional guidelines, but females need 10 milligrams more. So that's really, really important. Some good sources of foods that are high in iron are whole grain cereals are excellent sources, and as well as meat products. So here we have fish, poultry, and then bovine or cow sources or pig sources of meat as well are also higher in iron. Going back to when we were talking about bone health, calcium is really important for female athletes, and also important because females tend to consume less dairy than males, and calcium is really high in dairy products, but we really need calcium to help our growing bones. As I mentioned, it's pretty critical in the age group that we're in right now that we grow bones. Well, not that I'm in, but that you're in. It's really important that you accelerate bone growth or help to really lay the foundation for healthy bones while you're in this period of your life. And so you can grow bone actually until your late 20s, which is fantastic. So you all have plenty of time left to keep making strong and healthy bones, but you do that through consuming calcium and vitamin D, which we'll touch on in the next slide. Some really good sources, again, of calcium are dairy products. So we have yogurt, cheese, and milk here. We also have spinach is a really great source of calcium. You just need to eat a lot of it, as well as almonds. Moving into vitamin D. So vitamin D is required with calcium in order to support bone health. And so you can get vitamin D from a lot of dairy sources of protein. But a really good source of protein besides, oily fish, meat, and eggs is actually the sun. So I know it's difficult when we live in Canada, especially this time of year, there's less sun. Although if any of you are based in Calgary, I hear Calgary is the sunniest city in all of Canada. Someone can correct me on that later. But if you can get outside and get some sunshine for 10 minutes a day, that should provide an adequate amount of vitamin D. If not, try and consume it, through your foods, through oily fish, or even through vitamin D supplements. Just, a little tablet once a day is a good start. So in summary, biggest take-home message here is to make sure you are getting enough energy, which means you're getting enough food. That is our biggest take-home point here. Because our energy affects not just our muscles and our bones, but it affects our brains, which in turn affects our performance, right? And how are we going to perform well if we don't have enough energy? So there are some differences between males and females, and I'll admit from a science perspective, we're really lagging on how we've developed guidelines that are different between men and women, and those are really starting to come to fruition and really starting to make their mark a little bit better now as we do some more research, and that's largely in part to athletes like you all who have really helped us to show that we need to do more research in women. And lastly, always make sure you eat a wide variety of foods. Eating whole foods from lots of different sources, branching out and trying new things, it's really going to be the best to help, fuel you overall. And so with that, I'd just like to thank you all for paying attention, participating in the chat. That was really awesome. I'm happy to take any of your questions now. And thank you again so much for having me.
Amazing job, Sarah, and thank you for being here. I did see there's a few in the Q&A, which are actually some really great questions. So one that came up is there any vitamins that you would recommend supplementing with?
Yeah, so I'd say that, it's important that we try and get all of our vitamins and minerals because they're all necessary for different body functions in different amounts. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's really important. I think that you're always going to talk to a dietitian or to your doctor before you make any major changes in your diet and begin taking a supplement. The major thing I think that, we're comfortable as an organization saying are vitamin D supplements, especially for people in Canada. Like we just don't get enough sunshine to make up for the fact that we don't have enough vitamin D. And so one of my really good friends is actually a dietitian at a hospital. And she said, unless you're eating oily fish, so salmon every day, like you really should be taking a vitamin D supplement in the winter. So that's something that we would recommend, but you should always consult, with your doctor, your parents, someone in a nutrition field before you do any of that.
For sure. We've got another one here. Should you bring water and Gatorade to a hockey game? So if you just want to
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the important thing to understand is, the reason that we have Gatorade in a bunch of different forms. So we have Gatorade Zero, we have G2, which has less carbohydrates, and then we have regular Gatorade, which has more carbohydrates. They're all going to be for a different level of performance. So if you are just at a practice and it's maybe not as intensive a practice, you probably don't need as many carbohydrates in game. It's kind of when we get past that 60 to 90 minute mark of exercise that we want to consider having carbohydrates as part of our fuel, like in a sports drink, or even having a quick snack on the bench. So if you have like a 60-minute practice and it's kind of sub-intense, I wouldn't say that you necessarily need to have carbohydrates with you at that time. Those are the types of events where you could use, your body stores of carbohydrates, and then, when you go home and you have a meal, and then that way you're getting all the nutrients that you might need in the meal instead of having it just from a drink. But it's always important to stay hydrated. 10 out of 10 recommend bringing water everywhere all the time.
I agree. We've got another one here. It's a good question. So how soon after exercising should the athlete eat?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. I think a lot of this is going to come down to personal preference. So sometimes people don't feel great after they've done intense exercise. Maybe, your stomach might feel a little unsettled, and in which case don't feel the need to, get a meal in right away. Your body is going to be processing the effects of exercise for about 24 hours after you worked out or after you had a game. And so as soon as you're comfortable eating, I think it's important to refuel, particularly in young people, because we get distracted by everything, that it's kind of important that you just remember to refuel and refuel properly. And so I would suggest as soon as you're ready to eat after exercise is a good time. And then just making sure that whatever you eat is kind of well-rounded. So protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And again, consider using that protein calculator to figure out how much you should have.
Absolutely. We have one on here, and I think it's a good one because I think there's a lot of push out there, and I think you see some people shifting to being vegetarian or vegan. So what if you are vegan for iron? What would be some foods that you can turn to for that?
Yeah, so dark leafy greens are good sources of iron, as well as some almonds and some nuts are higher in iron. I think ultimately, if you are deciding to go vegan, there are plenty of athletes that can be, successful on a vegan diet, but it does take a considerable amount of planning to make sure you're getting good protein sources and then good nutrient sources as well. There are a couple of nutrients that are less available. So when we eat them from vegetable sources, they're harder to get into our bodies than when we eat them from meat sources or animal sources. So again, just making sure you have a chat with a dietitian who can kind of direct you to really good complementary sources to make sure that we're not deficient in anything, because especially when we're young, having any type of deficiencies or not eating enough of something is going to, really impact our health long term. So that's really important that you have a chat with a professional there.
For sure. We've got lots in the chat, so I'm trying to pick out some here because I know we won't be able to get to them all. Mm-hmm. I've got this, I think is a good one because I know that we've got some girls on here right from, I think, 6 or 7 all the way up to 18. So it says, what age would you say to start watching nutrition?
I'd say, from as early as you can. And I don't mean like start poking holes in your diet. I just mean being cognizant of what you eat. I think, you'll have a guardian or someone who is preparing your food for you, and they probably are making sure right now that you're getting everything that you need. But I think, as you get older and you start making nutrition choices on your own, so you're now in high school and you go out and have lunch with your friends, like just having a thought about what you have going on that day, what you have going on tomorrow. I think what's really important is nutrition isn't just important on game day. It's important the days leading up to game day, because you have to eat well to perform well. And then after game day, you have to repair and refuel your body for your next bout. And so just understanding that everything you eat and drink is going to affect your performance, I think is an important lesson to start thinking about now. But, that's why a lot of us are surrounded by some great people that can help us to make those choices.
For sure. Absolutely. We've got one here. It's a great one. If you get dehydrated, how much of a factor is that going to affect you physically and in your physical activity? I think it's a great question.
Yeah, so pretty severely. So on top of also needing carbohydrates for fuel, we need the water, like we need our bodies to be hydrated, because water is what is within all of our cells. It's what helps to move nutrients around. It's what helps to, keep without getting too technical, keeping like we have all these barriers in our body and things pass through in order to get to our brains, into our muscles. And if those barriers aren't functioning properly because we don't have enough water, it really, really impacts our performance. So I'd say hydration is number one. If you go into your game dehydrated, you're not going to perform your best. So try and have enough water. You know, if you have a first thing in the morning, make sure you're drinking enough the night before, because you know you're going to go to sleep and not drink for 8 hours or however long you sleep. But if you have a game later in the day, try and have a good amount of water throughout the day so that you go into your game hydrated. You know, hydration and carbohydrates are kind of the main factors that will impact our performance.
Okay, we'll do two more here. One, I've actually seen this pop up a couple times. So what would you recommend as a good source of calcium for someone who is lactose intolerant, or maybe sensitive?
Yeah, so I'm lactose intolerant, and I drink lactose-free milk. I'm a big proponent of milk. I eat a lot of cereal. So I'd say if you're lactose intolerant, lactose-free milk is a good option. Again, going back to more of non-dairy sources, we can look at green leafy vegetables. We just need them in higher amounts, as well as almonds are a good source as well.
Awesome. And to this one here, what about, so I know probably for the younger ones, they might have multiple games, or if they're involved in a number of different activities, what could be some examples of snacks between games that work, and what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the time and space between games, especially if we're thinking like a tournament situation. Something that we always like to recommend is, you know, choosing snacks and foods that are very familiar to you and things that are easily digested. Because especially if we're really shortening that window between when we play one game and play the next, we're not going to have as much time to digest that food. And so we want things that are probably lower in fiber and easier to break down. So those would be things like fruit, you know, juices, a smoothie that's already been blended, like those types of things will really be helpful, so that you're not feeling that kind of stomach ache before you move into your next exercise bout.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question. I know I said that after the last one, but I'm curious about this one. But what about healthy snacks at bedtime? Like, what would be some good go-tos so that you wake up sort of refreshed and it's not heavy, you sleep well?
Yeah, so we always try and recommend avoiding high-fat foods before you go to bed, just because they aren't metabolized as quickly and they usually sit in your stomach and you don't feel great going to bed. To be honest, there's not really anything that will make you feel more refreshed when you get up. I'd say being hydrated before you go to bed is a big one. Something that's really important that, you know, we've done a lot of research going forward and we'll continue to do is that, like I mentioned, when you go to sleep at, well, Dee and I go to sleep at 9:30. When you go to sleep at 9:30 and you don't get up again for another 8 to 9 hours, that's a really, really big period of time where you didn't eat anything. And so of particular importance for athletes is that normally when you eat protein, it helps us to build muscle. And during, you know, your awake hours, you're eating something with protein every 2 to 3 to 4 hours, whereas now you've gone to sleep and you're not eating anything with protein for 8 hours. So some of the research that we've done recently has been around having a protein shake before you go to bed, because it helps to, you know, keep that muscle building process going even while you're sleeping, so you can do some of that repair overnight.
That's awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. I know for me as a mom of two little ones, as I mentioned before, this is fantastic information to have. And I was sharing before we started things up that I think I'm more interested in nutrition and sort of fitness later in life than I was younger. So it's amazing that we're able to give these tools out earlier with these athletes. And I think I wish I had stuff like this and the knowledge and presentations and access to all of this when I was playing, because I think certainly would have helped me. Now I'm just starting to learn everything, and it's exceptional to see these athletes have that access. So thank you so much. We appreciate you coming on today and spending your time with us. So I know there was a lot of questions that we didn't necessarily get to. And I know there was a few of you asking about calculating protein in the chat. So we will send out Sarah's presentation after the event. So we'll get that out to you so then you can calculate it on your own time and figure that out. And then if there's anything else, I know that we can probably fire off some questions to Sarah and share that afterwards as well. So thank you again, Sarah. Really appreciate it. And good luck with everything when you do eventually get down to Florida when it's safe to do so.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I hope you enjoyed the next 2 days. This is an awesome experience for you and something I was saying to Dee I really wish I had access to when I was a young athlete trying to eat McDonald's in between my soccer games. So thanks so much, all, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Sarah.
See ya.
Bye.